Students continually perpetuate the myth that getting into med school is all about MCAT and GPA. And it's so much more than that. Application Renovation Episode 5. I'm excited. 4 episodes down. If you haven't watched episodes 1 through 4 yet, I highly encourage you to do that. Every application that we've reviewed is a little bit different, and so I bring up different mistakes and different problems that I see when reviewing those applications. As always, this series is brought to you by Next Step Test Prep Admissions Consulting. It's a new product offered by Next Step Test Prep, as they brought me on as their curriculum director to really help me help more students. I personally screen all of their advisors to make sure that they meet my standards. Go to nextsteptestprep.com, use the promo code MSHQ, and find out how they can help you with your applications so that you don't end up on this series. Let's go ahead and jump in to episode 5 of Application Renovation right now. All right, so let's talk about your application. And I'm going to jump as we look here. For context, before we jump into the application, I want to look at your GPA and your MCAT score, because it's a little bit different than last week. Last week we had a rougher GPA, rougher MCAT score. This week, a great MCAT score, 518, right? A 518 is awesome. And a decent GPA. Cumulative undergrad GPA 3.52, with maybe your weakest semester or your year being your sophomore year to 3.1. So not bad. So in your mind, let's talk about why you think you weren't successful, at least up until this point, with the application cycle.
Well, like you said, I think, grades and MCAT score are pretty strong. It took a while for me to, as a nontrad, to kind of figure out the other experiences that I could fit in with my work schedule and everything. So I didn't have a ton of clinical experience or shadowing. I think my shadowing was okay, but not a ton of clinical experience when I submitted my application. And I have wondered if that has weighted pretty heavily against me.
Okay. And you're a non-traditional student, so you're working full-time out in the workforce, and so you don't have as much time left to do everything else. Talk about other commitments. Do you have a family that you have a commitment to? Do you have a bunch of other commitments, or is it just kind of 9 to 5 work?
It's mainly 9 to 5 work. So I work as an engineer and have a mortgage, so I'm not real excited about giving up that salary until I really have to.
Yeah.
And then some other volunteer commitments. My dad and I started an endowment in my mom's name for the school where she taught, so I have some time that goes towards that.
Okay.
And then, otherwise it's been trying to fit in shadowing. I volunteer at a hospice organization. And I guess I should mention also that I'm still finishing some prereqs. So each quarter I, for the most part, just had one class. So either nights or weekends for a one class per quarter.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and dive into your application and take a look at potentially where we had some missteps. So just kind of basics that I always look at right away. I see that you submitted early on in the cycle, right? You submitted June 17th, which is awesome. It still took a month to verify, which kind of floors me that it took that long to verify when you submitted that early. And so you missed the first wave of applications going out, but it's not horrendous. It's still early, still great. Biographic information, nothing special there. Your parents here. No big red flags with institutional actions or felonies or anything else, which is good. That helps. And then we get into your transcripts, and we can see your grades here, some A's, B pluses starting out. Obviously, just knowing that your overall GPA is good, especially it looks like you were an engineer. your grades are actually really good for that as well. Looking at the courses that you took, you didn't take those prereqs, right? Which is why you did your post-bac work to get
That's right.
in your prereqs. You
Yes,
have
I need all the sciences.
Yeah, you needed all the sciences. So you have your graduate studies in here, and then getting into your post-bac. Obviously, you did really well with that. What prereqs were you missing when it came to once you submitted your applications?
I was still missing about basically one semester of biology was technically, and then some schools might require biochem or other kind of the one that every school would require is the semester of biology, which I'm on quarter system, so I have to take 2 quarters to make up for that.
Okay, so some prereq stuff, and schools typically won't hold that against you. They'll just hopefully make sure that you're completing all of those things before you matriculate, and that obviously there's a plan in place to do that. You've had enough sciences in your background to prove that you can handle science curriculum, and so for you, I would doubt that was any big issue.
Okay.
Obviously, your MCAT score is not going to hold you back from any school.
Can I ask, how much do they look for advanced science courses? I know they're not prereqs necessarily, but do they put weight on those?
In what way? What do you mean by that?
Oh,
explain that.
Like, do schools look, and if you have 2 students who have met the prereqs and got the same grades in the prereqs, but one of them has like neuroscience or I don't know, immunology or something that's more of a beyond the basic requirements, like how is that, like is that something I should think about? I guess
I wouldn't. I don't think it's necessary. It's not like the schools are going, okay, look, the student has already started preparing for her med school classes. She's already taking med school level classes. Like it's just it's impossible because med school is med school and undergrad is undergrad. So for students who have struggled earlier on, taking more of those upper division classes will help. Just continue to show an admissions committee that you can handle the coursework. But for somebody like you who has done really well, a great MCAT score, like you don't need to go continue to prove yourself over and above.
Okay.
All right. So I think for you, just looking GPA and grade wise, it's like, well, what else is there? And this is where I always talk about the application is so much more than NCAT and GPA.
Definitely.
Right? If you go onto the forums, onto Reddit, onto Student Doctor Network, even into the Facebook Hangout, right? Students continually perpetuate the myth that getting into med school is all about MCAT and GPA. And it's so much more than that, which is why we're doing this series, to really dig into what those other things are. So let's go ahead and look at some of those other things. So getting to your experiences, you said potentially there was a lack of some experiences in your background, lack of clinical experiences in your bag of tricks. So looking at the first thing that pops up here is your hospice volunteering. You have 50 hours of hospice volunteering starting in February of 2018, right? And you applied in June of 2018. So right off the bat, what that looks like is, oh, look, the student was trying to squeeze in some clinical experience, checking off those check boxes to make sure that she had those checked off for us. Okay. That doesn't show any sort of enthusiasm or passion for medicine. It shows that you were like, oh crap, I need to do something quick, and let me start doing this. Okay?
I totally know it looks like that. It wasn't like that, and I wish I could convince them otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. So let's look at the actual description here. The first line here, as a hospice volunteer, you never know how much time you'll have to get to know a person who is dying. Right? Yes, true. Guess what? As a human being, you never know how much time you will have to get to know a person before they die.
Okay.
Right? It's a super generic statement that doesn't mean anything, doesn't tell me anything about you. These are the types of statements that I try to have students just get rid of because it's just wasted space in my mind. It's not telling me anything about you at all.
Okay.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if we look at the rest of it, you have a story, which is great. You go right into a story about this patient, Marion. I would, just from a technicality standpoint, always put names in quotes, assuming it is a pseudonym. Just make it known that it is a pseudonym. I don't want to go, is that really the patient's name? Right? I'd hope that nobody would put real names in their application, but you never know. You tell the story of this patient, Marion, loving to talk about their hobbies and gardening and canned food, and you love canning food, and you love all of those things too. And so you tell this story, holding her hand, talking for a while, and she died a couple days later. I think that's a good story. That's the type of storytelling that I really like to have. It shows you just being there for a patient. You're not trying to tell me that, oh, look at me, I was compassionate and empathetic, and I was a good communicator, and I was a good listener. You were just telling a story of being there for the patient, which is good. Okay? So I think the biggest issue with this one is just the fact that it was squeezed in at the last minute, and you only had 50 hours.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought too.
Yeah. Your physician shadowing, you have here 50 hours as well. 50 hours is a decent amount. If you can get more, great. I would continue to get more. Just be consistent with it. One thing that students like to do is what you did here is saying, although I shadowed several other doctors for 4 to 8 hours each, I spent 32 hours with Dr. Grabowski, right? I don't need to know hours per physician and this and that. Like, again, that's just kind of wasted space to me. I don't think you need it. For physician shadowing specifically, it's very easy to just list. Okay, Dr. Grabowski, Dr. Smith, Dr. Jones, right? Just list, and if you want to list hours that way, great. And you don't need a description of telling a story here.
Oh, really?
For shadowing. Because shadowing is such a kind of passive experience that really doesn't matter.
I think that was one thing I struggled with was like, what kind of story do I tell? Because it's not really about me. I was just the fly on the wall.
Yeah, exactly. And so storytelling is usually a stretch for those ones.
Okay.
And then we get into some community service, which you have marked as most meaningful, and that's a good amount of hours over a period of time. Publications. So you have research, 1,600 hours. That's great. It looks like it's all engineering focused, and that's okay. Research doesn't have to be medically related research.
Okay.
Community service, again, several years, not a ton of hours over 4 years. So that tells me it's not a very active thing, but that's okay. Leadership you have for a couple years a while back, which is great. Paid employment, so you have your work that you're doing now. Teaching and tutoring, 2,000 hours over a year, which is awesome. Hobbies, cool hobbies. Students sometimes are told not to include hobbies, and I don't know why they're told that. I think it paints a better picture about who you are. So I'm glad you put your hobbies in there.
Good.
Honors, awards, research, a ton of hours there and a ton of hours there. Why? Interesting. So 10,000 hours for honors, awards, and recognitions. How did you come up with that number?
That was actually, well, so pretty much all of those are from when I was doing my PhD and or postdoc.
Okay.
So it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I spent 40 hours trying to get this award. It was an award, something that I was nominated for and received an award for during the time that I was doing my PhD research or my postdoc research.
Yeah. So I would probably next time you apply, assuming if you have to apply again, I would just put that as 0, right? You got an award. It didn't take me any hours. Obviously, there was all the work that led up to it, but the award was 0 hours.
Okay.
Right? So it just looks weird to have honors, awards, and recognitions in 10,000 hours. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. And then your last one here, research lab, obviously all of your PhD work going into that. So continuing back a little bit further, non-medical, clinical engineers without borders, trying to be like Doctors Without Borders. That's pretty cool. So that's over a long period of time as well. Maintaining balance. Talk to me about maintaining balance. What does that mean?
This is basically like kind of all the things I do to, I'm among all of the work and school and everything else, it's kind of go, go, go all the time. And so there's always an element of stress management.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I think the like more spiritual and right brain stuff comes in terms of like, basically helping me be a balanced person and not kind of like going crazy and stressed out.
Okay.
So meditation, yoga, guitar, painting, I think are the things I mentioned in there.
All right. Okay.
Maybe a different title would be good.
Yeah, a different title I think would be good. I'm trying to remember if artistic endeavors is one of the experience types. I think I've seen it before potentially. I don't know if it's somebody who just put the experience name as artistic endeavors or if it's an experience type. I don't know off the top of my head, but maybe potentially putting that if it is a selection, artistic endeavors, and talking about yoga and painting and guitar and all this other stuff as something. So it may tell a better picture. All right, and some more hobbies and running here. So you have 3 hobbies. And you have 1 clinical experience that it looked like you slammed in there right at the end. Okay? And so if I were to stop right there, I would say that's probably a big part of why you didn't get in. And not specifically, but without having read your personal statement yet, my assumption is that your personal statement probably isn't very good because you don't have any clinical experience to base it on.
Okay.
Right? If I were to ask you right now, with 50 hours of hospice experience, when you submitted your application, why do you want to be a doctor? What experience do you have, according to your experience list, do you have that really shows me why? Okay? And that's typically where students struggle. When I talk to students who are struggling with their personal statement, and we go like A to Z through all my questions about a personal statement, and I get to the end and they're still struggling, I'll go, wait a minute, I haven't asked you, what sort of clinical experience do you have? And it's usually, I don't have any. I'm like, well, that's why you're having a problem writing your personal statement. So this is a huge red flag for me and for a lot of schools. That there are plenty of students who get in with no shadowing. There are plenty of students who get in with no clinical experience. There's something else in their application that the school liked, and they're like, okay, that's fine. Hopefully you'll like clinical experience, but we're going to let you in anyway. But there's something with your application at this point that is missing. The experience descriptions, looking at them, just briefly, you're showing a lot of impact here. Your leadership experience, talking about the business case, showed 42% profit increase over 3 to 5 years, right? Showing impact. That's awesome. So as much as you can continue, if you have to rewrite your your applications, your extracurriculars, continue to do what you're doing, because they're pretty good.
Yeah. I think that having thought about this, if I do end up having to reapply, I've done, I've probably got 120 hours with hospice now and a lot more experience with a lot more patients.
Okay.
I think at this point, I would actually potentially put that as one of my most meaningful.
Okay.
And I do feel like I have a lot more to say about it, both the impact on me and my, impact on other people. So that's one thing that I think would be a definite improvement.
Definitely. Can you potentially try to get some different experience as well outside of just hospice? Maybe volunteering on the weekends in an emergency room, trying to get some experience in a hospital.
Yeah, that's funny that you should mention that, because I finally got an interview for a volunteer position at an emergency department here at one of the hospitals here, and should be able to start that like at the next couple weeks. So it won't be a ton of hours by the time I apply, but
it'll be about 50. Just like hospice was the first time.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But it'll add
that's good. It just gives you again a broader kind of perspective of healthcare outside of just hospice. And hospice is great. I always recommend hospice to students. So that's good. All right. So let's take a look at your personal statement. What were you trying to talk about in your personal statement?
Well, I kind of opened up with the real trigger moment for me was my mom's death of illness and death of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. And during that time, seeing how the impact that her doctors, her neurologists had on her health, or, really her care for her. It wasn't her health continued to deteriorate, but the care for her and for our family as well. And then the same thing with hospice. And that was when I really started thinking, oh, maybe I want to become a doctor. And so then I was trying to talk about...
How old were you at this point?
This was almost 3 years ago, so I was 35.
Okay. So you were still...
Wait, I was 34. I keep adding a year to my age.
That's okay. And I don't need to know a specific age. And the question I asked because, and you did put the date on there, so it should have registered when this was kind of in your process, is a lot of students will tell this story without any sort of date or age or anything. And I always ask the question, like, how old were you during this? Because it gives the reader context as to kind of your state of mind and your position in life at that point. And so telling this story, obviously, with your mom having CJD, getting that disease, obviously a horrendous disease, quick death, not very fun, is super impactful, and it gives a lot of context into what's going on in your life at that point. So
would it help if I was more clear about like my approximate age or place in life rather than just that date?
I don't think so. Not yet. So let's continue talking. So you talk about the CJD and how that impacted you. What was the journey like, taking the reader through your journey? What were you trying to accomplish?
Well, I wanted to say, like, basically my process was I was going kind of grieving her death, but also starting to think about what would it look like to become a doctor. And a few people had given me like books by Oliver Sacks and, some kind of neurology type stuff. And I started reading about that. I was like, well, the science is really interesting. And the stories of these patients are really interesting. I want to get some more experience with shadowing. I also wanted to do, get clinical experience with patients and see if I really wanted to do that. I think as an engineer, one of the things that I've been wanting for a while was to be working more with people on improving their lives and not so much with my computer. And so I had a paragraph that I threw in there that, I've always had an interest in improving people's quality of life. And I sort of went the environmental route in terms of environmental engineering at first. And then I didn't really say it, super clearly in there. No, maybe I did. I just basically that I wanted to make an impact at a more personal level. So I guess that first few paragraphs is kind of that lead up. And then I started getting into more of shadowing and clinical experience. It took me a while to get into a position where I could gain that clinical experience.
Yeah.
As you saw from the activities essay. But I tried to really talk about that, the last few paragraphs of the essay to explain what I was observing when I was shadowing and how some of the really specific patient interactions and why I thought they were so meaningful.
Okay. So looking at your personal statement, the first half of it or so is your mom, and then with that first paragraph, and then the second paragraph talking about how it impacted you and how you think you wanted to be a physician. The third paragraph talking about the career you're coming from. So as a non-traditional student, sometimes it's good to talk about where you're coming from, right? Just to give some context to the reader about your previous life. I think potentially you tried a little bit too hard here to show, look, I've always wanted to help people. Without right. I'm always amazed at how many times I can find a new way that somebody writes about how they want to help people. And so I think
you have to say it, but not say it.
Yeah. You just don't need to say it. So I'm more interested. Why did you choose your career? Not necessarily from helping people and impacting their lives, but more on another level, right? What was that interest there? The fourth paragraph probably doesn't mean anything. Again, I'm always interested in ways that students can tell me, I really like science, and here you're telling me, look at me, I started reading everything about science. I really like it.
Well, so I guess one of the things, it was neurology in particular that really grabbed my attention.
Well, of course.
And has continued to hold my attention. And I guess that I felt like that was part of my story, but I do understand, I'm trying to say more than just hey, I like science.
Yeah.
Is there a way or a reason to say that, or should I just leave it out?
I think you should just leave it out. There's no reason for it. Because 75% of students entering medical school with one thought of what they want to do will change their mind anyway. And so the goal is to talk about why you want to be a physician, not why you like neurology. Obviously, to anybody reading your personal statement, if you have the death of a parent who had CJD, it's going to be pretty obvious. You're going to be pretty interested in the brain after that.
Yeah. Okay.
So that whole paragraph could probably get scratched. So the progression that I want to see is, okay, what was your seed, and then what experiences have you had since? Okay, so I have the seed. I have a paragraph about PhD, which is great for a non-traditional student. I have this Oliver Sacks paragraph, which we don't need. And then let's move on. The next one. So here we have a potential watering of the seed, right? Of interacting with this patient where you, I'm assuming you're shadowing here because it sounds like you're in a hospital setting. And when you wrote your personal statement, you've only had hospice experience as clinical experience. And so shadowing in general is typically weaker.
Shadowing, yeah.
And so you have the patient here, Jamie, crippling weakness and fatigue. You're describing her here. The patient talking to you. All you could do was offer a blanket and empathetic ear. So again, a little bit of a sales pitch here of, look at me, I have empathy. So try to avoid that kind of stuff. So really the question I would have here is, why did this story make you want to be a physician? So you tell this story of look, there was this time I was interacting with a patient. She was asking me questions. I couldn't answer them. The doctor answered them. Next story. Okay, but why did that story make you want to be a physician? There's no reflection there. There's no soul searching and really reflecting on it to tell the reader, look, here's this interaction I had with a patient who was in a vulnerable state, who was trying to lean on me for support, and here's why I want to be a physician. Here's why that experience watered the seed, which I always talk about in my book of planting the seed and watering the seed. How did that water the seed? Why did that experience make you want to be a physician even more? Okay?
Okay.
So reflection, reflection, reflection. You jump into another experience here, visiting a patient in hospice. Wanda, again, just kind of style. I would put the quotes around all the names. Late stages of dementia. So I like the fact that you're trying to storytell here. I think you possibly could do a little bit more showing and not telling. At the end of my visit, I asked Wanda if I could come see her again, and she nodded almost imperceptibly. Those tiny signs of potential awareness in Wanda encouraged me to continue visiting her, even as her responses diminish over time. Okay? Going back to that question, why did that experience make you want to be a physician? I'm left with, you really like to volunteer in hospice.
I think one of the things that I tried to do was take those two stories and then talk more about do more of the reflection in that third paragraph, like tying both of the stories together. So I don't know. I guess
don't get too fancy because every paragraph that I read, I'm always constantly asking myself, why am I reading this? Why am I reading this? Why am I reading this? And if you leave me hanging, I'm gonna I'm bored, move on.
Okay.
So let's get to that next paragraph here. Wanda like Jamie, so you're comparing the two here. Wanda's physician care team ensure those needs are met so that Wanda's quality of life. So kind of a generic statement, right? Yep, that's what physicians and care teams do. Right? So you don't need to. It's a very common, students try to explain what medicine is like, and you don't need to do that. Again, kind of observing the physician's care of Jamie and Wanda illuminates the variety of ways a doctor can care for a patient. Yep, there are a variety of ways. Right, so just generic statements like that. And so here's your reflection finally at the very end, right? These observations motivate me to become a physician because I want to be able to care for patients by responding to their individual needs. Okay? So let's break down that sentence. I want to, if we removed patients from there, I want to be able to respond to their individual needs. Does that sound like a physician? If we remove the word patient and just say, I want to be able to respond to individual needs.
Well, I mean, it could describe a lot of things depending on the setting, sure.
Yep. So try to, as specific as possible, try to reflect in a way that shows me why physician. Responding to individual needs could mean I want to be the best server in the whole entire world. And I want to make sure every customer has the best dining experience by responding to their individual needs. Okay? So try to be as specific as possible with those reflections. Going back to your conclusion here, having spent the last 2 years learning, shadowing, interacting with patients, I am ready to become a physician. Okay. right? The declarative statements I'm not a fan of because they don't really mean anything. It's more just kind of chest beating. Look at me, I'm ready to do this. I don't think you need it.
Okay.
My interactions with patients and observations of doctors illustrate to me that both the responsibility and the reward of medicine are found in diligently and compassionately serving the needs of the patient. Again, kind of explaining what medicine is like, what being a physician is like. You don't need to explain that. Just because
Okay.
you've observed and you've seen that doesn't mean anything to me as to why you want to be a physician or why you should be one. And another kind of declarative statement at the end, I'm ready to commit to practicing. I like to go big here. What do you hope to accomplish as a physician? Right? The conclusion is if we're going to give you this education, what do you hope to accomplish? How are you going to make an impact on the world?
So I debated like whether I could go big on that, and was talked down by a few different readers. But okay.
Yeah. So let's talk. Let's look at your school list. So your school list, I think you did probably a very classic. Looked at your MCAT score and said, "Heck yeah, show me the big boys." Right? And so the first two we have on here, Columbia and Duke, great schools. And then when we look at the rest of the list, Emory, Georgetown, Hopkins, NYU, OHSU, Penn State, UPenn, UCLA, UCSD, UW, University of Wisconsin, that's a random one in there, and then Vandy. Okay, so breaking this down, where are you? You're a resident of what state?
I'm a resident of Washington State.
Okay,
so
Washington
University
State.
of Washington's my school state.
Okay, so you have one school state there. You have.
There were a handful that I included that I didn't really realize are very in-state focused, like OHSU and Wisconsin and Penn State. I just didn't understand when I was applying that they really mostly accept in-state students.
Yep.
So
UCLA, UCSD, Wisconsin is a public school as well. Some of the schools like Wisconsin, Michigan, where they don't have a huge population of pre-med students, their mixes are still pretty favorable, and so it's not impossible, but it's always harder to apply to public out-of-state schools. With you, your MCAT score probably opened up a lot of doors for you, and you ended up getting an interview at UCLA, right? Mm-hmm. So your MCAT score opened some doors for you. They liked your personal statement enough. Say that again?
I said really early in the cycle, actually. I was honestly really surprised.
Yeah, and that's because, right, it's just kind of behind the scenes for a lot of schools is they'll pull in all the applications, they'll sort by MCAT score and go, oh, 518, let's look at the rest. Yeah, let's invite her for an interview. And that's why it's always later in the cycle, students with lower stats finally get those interview invites because they're done going through their list after they've sorted it all out. And so a 518 is going to open some doors for you. But you applied to a lot of top-notch schools that are super competitive for everyone. Yeah. And your GPA probably isn't super competitive for a lot of these schools, depending on how they evaluate. And that's why I hate, and I use that word very freely here, I hate applying to medical schools based on MCAT and GPA. Because you have no idea what they're looking for. They may love your MCAT score and go, the 3.5, no problem. They may look at the 3.5 and go, even though you have a good MCAT score. They may want a lot more clinical experience, which you don't have, even though you have great stats. And so it's when you apply to so many top-notch schools based on a 518 MCAT, you end up in a situation where you're at, where it's the end of the cycle with really strong stats, maybe a little weakness here and there, but you should have gotten in somewhere this cycle.
Well, can I kind of explain the other thought processes behind the school selections?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't, I mean, I looked at the GPA and MCAT stuff, but I really I knew that I was shooting high on a number of those, especially in terms of my GPA. But it was sort of this combination of like probably 5 or 6 of those schools are they are sort of more competency rather than coursework focused now.
Okay.
And
NYU is one of those.
Yeah, and I had there were a bunch of schools I couldn't apply to this year because I could not finish the prereqs. So like they were going to require, I don't remember what are some of the other ones that I would need to take. If I have to do another round of applications, I'll still be taking more prereqs next year. So these are the ones that I knew I could finish before matriculation, whatever their requirements were. And then it was also this other factor of my significant other and I talking about where would we want to live for 4 years, and maybe not being open-minded enough about where that would be.
Yeah. Well,
so
you
it kind of depends on where his job would be and those kind of things.
Yeah. So looking at your application, though, you have Penn on there, right? Which is in Philadelphia. So you obviously said, hey, let's live in Philadelphia. Well, what about Drexel? What about Temple? What about Thomas Jefferson? You applied to NYU, right? What about Sinai? What about New York Med? What about? So there are a lot of schools that aren't as prestigious as the list that you created that probably would have jumped at having you as at least for an interview based on stats alone that I think you left off the table. And school list is important. I typically it's frustrating for students who work with me because when it comes to school list, I'm like, well, where do you want to go? Right? There's no magic in creating a school list, but it's very easy to look at a school list and probably say that probably wasn't very good because it's just all really competitive schools.
Yeah.
So.
I looking back, hindsight's 20/20, and I didn't understand those things as clearly when I was making the list last year. So.
Yeah. And now you know. So you have a strong MCAT score. You don't need to improve that. You've taken some more classes, so that's I'm assuming continuing to improve your GPA. You've gotten more clinical experience. You're getting some more, hopefully starting in the emergency room. Are you continuing to shadow?
Yep.
Great. Continuing to shadow. You got your job doing that. So all of the pieces are coming together now. Now it's rewriting extracurriculars and personal statement, unfortunately, again. I think your extracurricular descriptions looked pretty good. The brief kind of look that we took a look today. Personal statement, some fixes here and there. But I think with just some tweaks here and there and kind of a more thorough school list, not so selective with those really, really super competitive schools, I think you could easily get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 acceptances next year when you apply. And obviously, there's a lot we're leaving out, right? There's still secondary essays and doing well and turning those in on time, and then doing well in your interviews.
Yeah. Can I ask, so I'm in my late 30s. One thing that I know you've talked about on the podcast, like, people in their 30s and older go to med school.
Yep.
Is there any sense of like the bar being a little bit higher? Because I am,
it's impossible to answer. Humans are humans and they have their biases, and so could potentially there be somebody at an admissions department who's reviewing your application go, ooh, you're a little bit older. Ooh, are you going to want to have kids? Ooh, like all of that may come into play. But it's a useless question in my mind because it is what it is.
Can't change it.
You can't change it. So why even worry about it?
Okay.
Right? Nothing you can do. So you put forward the best application possible. You apply to a broad range of schools, and you perform well on interview day.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Let me just. I scratched down a few questions. I think we've covered most of them, but oh, I did. I think one of the other things that I sort of thought about in terms of making that school list was like, okay, my grades might not be, a 4.0, but I do have a PhD in engineering. Like, does that count for something?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty. It counts as some
Yeah.
extra letters. I mean, it counts. So they could look at your undergrad GPA and go, "Oh, it's an engineering degree," and go, "Okay, let's bump that up a couple points." They could do that, but
Okay.
I wouldn't bet on it. But they could.
All right. So, if anything, what would count really is just the research experience from that? Maybe.
Well, it all counts. I mean, your life experience counts. So I wouldn't discount it, but I wouldn't use it as a crutch either.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, just looking. Yeah, I think that kind of covers the things that I thought we would talk about, and I took lots of notes. So.
All right.
Thank you for going through that.
Yeah, you're welcome.